I never expected the sound of laughter to hurt like that. It wasn't the kind of laughter you hear at weddings or in old movies where everyone clinks glasses and kisses after dessert. No, this was thinner, meaner, the kind that echoes inside you long after the table's been cleared. I was halfway through my iced tea when it happened. Ashley leaned across the table, her manicured nails tapping the side of her wine glass like it owed her something. "It's okay, guys," she said, her voice just a touch too loud, too cheerful. "My mom's sweet, just broke." The words dropped like a stone in my stomach. The table erupted, soft giggles from her friends, exaggerated awes. One girl even whispered, "She's adorable though, like that grandma in the soup commercial." And just like that, I was no longer a person. I was a punchline with lipstick. I stared down at my plate, a few limp pieces of arugula left swimming in dressing. I'd barely touched my food. The appetizers alone had cost more than I'd spent on groceries last week. Ashley had insisted on this place, some rooftop fusion spot she'd seen on TikTok with artichoke aioli and recycled wine barrels for chairs. "Ma, don't pout," she added, nudging my arm. "You always told me it's good to laugh at yourself." I smiled, the same way you smile when the dentist says, "Just a little pressure." I wanted to say something, anything. Remind her of all the nights I skipped meals so she could eat, of the winter I worked double shifts at the community center, then cleaned offices after midnight just to afford her violin lessons she quit 2 months later. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I folded my napkin neatly and laid it across my lap. When the check came, I reached for it, out of habit. Ashley snatched it up with a performative gasp. "Mom, really?" she said, eyes wide. "You don't have to play hero. Just leave the tip if you want." One of her friends chuckled. "That's fair. She's doing her part." I left a $10 bill on the table. It was all I had left in my purse after paying rent last week. I folded it quietly beneath the dessert spoon. They didn't see. They were too busy arguing over who had the best lighting for a group selfie. We walked out of the restaurant, into a breeze thick with city grime and weekend perfume. Ashley linked arms with 2 of her friends and turned to me briefly. "You heading home, Ma? I'll text you about next weekend, okay? We might do something low-key." "Low-key." I nodded. "Thanks for dinner," I said. She kissed the air near my cheek and was gone. The train station was a 12-minute walk, but I took the long way. I needed time to find my footing again. The streets buzzed around me, neon signs flickering, couples laughing over shared milkshakes, a busker strumming chords that didn't quite match his lyrics, and yet it was quieter than that table had been. The thing about public shame is it doesn't come with clean exits. You don't just walk away, it clings like wine to a white blouse or the scent of old regret. I passed the window of the restaurant again and paused. From the outside, it looked like a painting. Golden lights, clinking glasses, curated laughter. But behind the counter, just past the swinging door, I saw it, a flicker of something real. The kitchen was chaos. A short-staffed server dropped a tray. One of the cooks, a woman around my age, was yelling over the sound of boiling pots. The manager was rubbing his temples while the bartender argued with a delivery driver. This wasn't curated, this was survival. I watched as a teenage busboy ran back and forth with a stack of dirty plates, his hands shaking. The hostess, probably younger than Ashley, stood frozen, eyes wide as the line at the door grew longer. And just like that, something sparked inside me. I saw the crack, the opportunity, the tiredness in the staff, the way the lights flickered above the bar, the handwritten sign on the window that said "Now hiring, kitchen manager." I turned away, pretending I hadn't noticed, but the seed had been planted. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light casting shadows across the peeling laminate. I opened the drawer where I kept my old notebooks, yellowed edges, frayed corners. Most were recipes, others were restaurant layouts, pricing models, scribbled dreams from a time when I used to believe in someday. One, though, was marked with a single word: backup. Inside, it was my quiet secret, every tip I saved from my job at the food co-op, the widow's benefit check I never touched, a partial inheritance from a cousin in Texas I hadn't spoken to in years. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to start a conversation, to walk through that restaurant's back door and ask a few real questions. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my charcoal coat, the one I'd kept from my years working kitchen prep, and stared at the city lights outside my window. I kept thinking about the way Ashley had smiled after calling me broke like it was a performance she'd been rehearsing. But I wasn't a side character in her little influencer reel. I had my own story, and maybe it was time I started telling it. By morning, the city was gray with drizzle. I liked mornings like this. Quiet, soft, the kind that made you feel like you still had time to change something before the world fully woke up. I brewed a pot of weak coffee, just the way Harold used to make it, and pulled the worn black notebook toward me, the one labeled Backup. There was a folded corner on page 17. I turned to it without hesitation. It listed names, old names, people from a life I hadn't touched in years. Sal the butcher from my co-op days, Mrs. Ningy, who used to sell spice blends out of her garage, and Tomas, God bless him, who once taught me how to run a kitchen line when I filled in for a no-show cook in '98. I wasn't anyone important back then, just someone who showed up on time, washed their hands, and didn't flinch at grease burns. But I'd listened, I'd watched, and I remembered everything. The notes were scattered but sharp: how to order produce wholesale, how to haggle on second-hand equipment, how to run profit margins without digital systems, all handwritten, all in the margins of recipes and taped receipts. I had no formal degree, no framed certificate, just ink-stained pages and a memory that hadn't let me down yet. At 10:15 a.m., I was standing at the corner of 52nd and Halberd, across from the restaurant Ashley had called "too classy for broke vibes." The manager's name was still posted on the website: Ronnie Graff, operations lead and part owner since 2012. I dialed the number listed on the site. The line rang 5 times before a tired voice answered. "This is Ronnie." I cleared my throat. "Hi, I'm calling about the kitchen manager posting." A pause. "Are you with an agency?" "No, just interested." He exhaled. "We've had 3 interviews. None showed up. You have experience?" "Plenty. Not recent, but it's there." "What's your availability?" "I'm outside your front door." I heard silence, then the creak of the restaurant's main window curtain being pulled aside. A face, mid-40s, skeptical, with a receding hairline and flour on his apron, stared out at me. We locked eyes. He waved me in. The place looked worse in the daylight. The smell of fryer oil clung to the walls, and the tile grout near the prep line had turned a shade of beige that didn't exist in nature. I didn't say a word, just took it all in. Ronnie crossed his arms. "You're not what I expected." "I get that a lot." He gestured toward the back office, a cluttered square with 2 folding chairs and a crooked printer that blinked low toner. I sat. "You got references?" "No, but I've got knowledge." "You want full-time?" "No, I want the kitchen." He raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "I want to buy your partner's share." He blinked. I watched his mind pivot from polite disinterest to confusion to defense. "I'm not selling," he said. "Not yet." "You said your partner's share. That means there's more than one owner. That means one of you is tired." His jaw tightened. I saw it, the strain behind his eyelids. "My partner passed away 3 months ago," he said quietly. "He was the talent. I'm the spreadsheets." I lowered my voice. "You're bleeding, Ronnie. You've got a great spot, a terrible layout, underpaid staff, and your kitchen runs like a thrift store on Black Friday. And the staff, they're burning out." He didn't argue. "I can help," I said, "but not as an employee, as a partner." He chuckled once, without warmth. "You got capital for that?" "I've got enough." "Credit check?" "No credit, cash." That shut him up. He looked at me differently now, not like a joke, but like a variable, something he hadn't accounted for. "I'd need time," he said finally. "You've got it." We sat in silence for another minute, then he stood. "You know anyone who can fix a 6-burner range?" "I can fix a 6-burner range." He smiled, thin and wary. "You got a name?" "Nadine," I said. "But if you're writing it down, use N. Morales. That's how it appears on contracts." By noon, I was elbow-deep in grease with a borrowed wrench and a roll of plumber's tape. The pilot light was misaligned, the ignition valve loose. It took me 20 minutes and a prayer. When it flared back to life, Ronnie let out a low whistle. "You weren't lying." "Never had time to be." The head cook, a lanky 20-something named Kai, passed by and nodded. "You're the new temp?" "Something like that," I said. I didn't stay long, just enough to watch how they plated the lunch rush, how the orders piled up without coordination, how no one had restocked the prep bins since breakfast. It was all held together by duct tape and habit. But I saw bones under it. Good bones, the kind you could build from. That night, I pulled out a folder from the bottom of my pantry. It still had grease smudges from 2003. Inside were sketches, a layout for a kitchen optimized for flow, ideas for a modular counter system, notes on how to prep fresh sauces without commercial preservatives. I hadn't touched them in years. They didn't feel old, they felt patient. I also made a second list: people. Not the ones Ashley surrounded herself with, but the ones who'd shown up when I couldn't afford to ask. Retired cooks, single moms with knife skills, a dishwasher named Rosie, who once sang opera while scrubbing pans. I'd find them, or others like them. I'd staff this place with ghosts of the overlooked people like me. I didn't call Ashley. I didn't need to. Let her think I was licking wounds. I was writing blueprints. By the end of the week, I knew more about that kitchen than half the people working in it. They were good people, undertrained, overworked, and skating on instinct. Kai, the line cook, had real technique but no consistency. His mise en place was a mess, and his timing was all over the place. Jamie, the pastry assistant, had a sweet touch but constantly burned her own nerves with every mistake. The dishwasher, Marcus, was a high school dropout with calloused hands and the quiet, coiled focus of someone who'd survived worse than double shifts. They weren't lazy, they were drifting. No anchor, no vision, and that made them vulnerable to burnout, or worse, apathy. Ronnie had been watching me, not with suspicion anymore, but with a cautious kind of hope. He didn't say much, just nodded when I cleaned the walk-in or corrected an inventory log. I wasn't trying to impress him. I was trying to see if the bones of this place still had marrow. One night, after the last customer left and the chairs were flipped onto the tables, I found myself alone with him in the office again. The overhead light buzzed faintly. "I spoke to a broker," he said, "told him I had an interested buyer." I kept folding the rag in my hands. "You serious about this?" I looked at him. "I don't bluff." He leaned back in the rickety chair. "I'd be selling you half a broken ship." I smiled faintly. "Good, means it's cheaper." Ronnie stared at the floor. "I don't want to leave this place, but I can't keep losing money." "You won't? You that confident?" "No, I'm just that tired of watching people settle." The silence stretched long between us. "I'll give you an answer in 2 days," he said. "There's one more party who might be interested. Younger guy wants to rebrand as a craft beer lounge." I didn't flinch. "Then you'll have to decide what kind of place you want to run. One with soul, or one that just sells foam in tall glasses." I stood, wiped my hands, and walked out without waiting for a reply. 2 days later, Ronnie called. "Let's talk numbers," he said. No hesitation in his voice, no apologies either, just a clean pivot. That's when I knew we'd work well together. We met at a greasy little diner off Delaney Street, vinyl booths, burnt coffee, and hash browns that left a shine on the plate. It was the kind of place where nobody cared if you sat for 2 hours without ordering twice. That mattered. He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were tax statements, the restaurant's debt ledger, and a rough breakdown of ownership percentages. "You sure about this?" he asked. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. I'm asking because it's not clean. You're not walking into some gleaming investment. You're walking into a house with termites." "I've lived in worse," I said, "and I'm not here to flip it. I'm here to feed people, real food, real folks, not influencers with ring lights and discount codes." He snorted. "Ashley said you were sweet, just broke." He waited, checking if I'd react. I didn't. I simply tucked the folder into my tote and said, "She's about to find out I was neither." The buy-in went through by the end of the month. Ronnie drafted a quiet press release, just enough to notify suppliers and vendors. No splashy headlines, no front-of-house drama, just a new name added to the partnership files and a new key on my ring. I didn't make a big announcement to the staff. I didn't hang banners or hand out new uniforms. What I did was show up earlier than anyone, every morning with a clipboard and 2 thermoses of coffee. One for me, one for whoever needed it most. The changes were subtle at first. The prep board got reorganized. Kai's station was rearranged for better efficiency. Jamie got a proper oven timer and a new pair of gloves. The playlist changed, from lo-fi to soft jazz. And every Thursday, I made lunch for the crew, family style, on real plates, not to-go containers. They didn't know what to make of it at first, but they ate, and they stayed after their shifts to clean more than they had to. Respect, like sourdough, takes time to rise. Ronnie noticed. One afternoon, he leaned against the doorframe of the storage closet while I labeled jars of dried rosemary. "You're building something here," he said, quietly. "It's the only way things last." He nodded. The guy with the craft beer lounge idea called, asked if I was still interested in his offer. What'd you say? I said I already found someone with better taste. I smiled at that. It wasn't a compliment, it was a confirmation. The night before our first relaunch dinner, I stood in the empty dining room, rearranging chairs that no one would notice were crooked. The new sign hadn't gone up yet. We hadn't rebranded officially, but the bones had shifted. The place was starting to hum again. The menu had been trimmed down, no more fancy-sounding reductions or obscure garnishes, just roasted chicken with lemon thyme, ribeye with garlic butter, bread pudding with warm cream, food you remembered the next day. I heard the bell above the front door chime. I turned, expecting Marcus or one of the vendors, but it was Ashley. She stood in the entryway in high-waisted jeans and heels that made no sense on a rainy night. Her hair was pulled tight, her eyes scanning the place like it was a foreign country. "Mom?" she said, hesitant. I didn't answer right away. I let her take it in. The polished wood floors, the rearranged art, the smell of rosemary and heat. "What are you doing here?" I asked evenly. "I saw your name on the LLC registry," she said. I'm a partner." Her brow furrowed. "But why?" "Because you called me broke," I said, "and sometimes clarity comes in the form of laughter." She looked small then, not because of the room, but because the power she used to wield, assumptions, appearances, didn't hold here. "This was supposed to be my spot," she said, softer. "It was our place, the cool place." I nodded slowly. "Then I suppose you'll need a new place." Ashley didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there in that doorway, caught between curiosity and the realization that she no longer had the upper hand. The silence stretched, not heavy, but exact. A silence that asked, "Do you see me now?" She began, then stopped. Her voice had a different quality here. It didn't carry like it did across rooftop tables and curated brunches. It sounded younger somehow, unfinished. "I didn't mean it," she said finally. "That night, what I said, it was a joke." I didn't answer. I'd waited a long time to speak. I wasn't about to fill the space too easily. "You know how people talk," she continued. "We were just laughing. That's how everyone is these days. It's how we connect." I ran a hand down the edge of the nearest chair, smoothing the linen napkin into place. "And that's what I was?" I asked. "A punchline for connection?" She blinked. "No. You're twisting it." I looked up at her. "Ashley, do you know how long it's been since you asked me anything real about my life?" She shifted her weight, suddenly aware of how loud her heels sounded against the hardwood floor. "Mom, you knew where I lived. You knew I was careful with money. But did you ever ask why? Or how I kept everything running after your father left? You think being quiet is the same as being weak?" "I don't." "But you do. You learned it somewhere. Maybe from me. Maybe from the world. But you wore that word broke like a badge to distance yourself, to say I'm not like her. And the truth is, Ashley, you aren't." Her face flushed, not with rage, but embarrassment. Real, visible discomfort that didn't know where to land. "This place," I continued, "isn't about revenge. It's about truth, about building something with the kind of hands that don't post proof of their worth." She folded her arms across her chest. Her nails were painted a muted gold. I remembered when those hands were smaller, clumsier, when she used to grip mine in the supermarket so tightly you'd think the linoleum floors might carry her away if she let go. "I guess I should go," she muttered. "That's up to you." She lingered for a moment, then left without saying goodbye. The bell above the door gave one tired chime, and the wind that followed her out smelled like rain. The relaunch night arrived a week later. We didn't do much in terms of decorations. No balloons, no streamers, no overproduced branding. Just soft lighting, handwritten menus, and a team that showed up early, nervous but ready. I wore the same charcoal coat, pressed it that morning, folded the cuffs just once. I didn't want to look like a chef. I wanted to look like myself, someone who had spent a lifetime building without applause. The first guest arrived at 6:04, a retired teacher named Miss Bledsoe, who used to sit beside me on the bus when I worked at the co-op. She hugged me with both arms and said, "You finally did it." "I'm just getting started," I told her. By 6:45, the tables were full. Laughter filled the room, not the brittle kind from Ashley's dinner, but rounder, warmer, the kind that belongs to people who know what it means to savor a moment. Kai didn't burn a single dish. Jamie's creme brulee cracked perfectly under the spoon. Marcus, once silent as a ghost, worked the floor between kitchen runs with his shoulders back and chin high. Ronnie watched it all from the host stand, arms crossed, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smile he didn't try to hide. "This feels different," he said as I passed. "It is." Midway through the night, I stepped outside for air, not because I needed space, but because I wanted to see the place from the sidewalk again. It looked different now, glowing, alive, like a story halfway through its arc. Across the street, a small group of young women were snapping photos near the window. One of them pointed toward the menu and said, "My mom would love this place." That did something to me, bent something inward, but not in a painful way. I went back inside. At 8:30, Ashley returned. She came in alone, without a reservation. Her coat was damp from the weather. She stood awkwardly near the door until Marcus spotted her and gave a quiet nod in my direction. I walked over. "Didn't expect you back," I said. She looked around. "It's beautiful. It's honest. I wanted to try the chicken. Everyone's been talking about it. Take a seat, I'll bring it out." She didn't argue. She chose a small table near the window. For once, no phone in hand, no performance, just her, waiting. I plated the roasted chicken myself, brushed it with lemon butter, added a pinch of finishing salt, placed it on the tray with both hands steady. When I set it down in front of her, she looked up and whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time in a very long time, I heard her voice without defensiveness, just a daughter who remembered what it felt like to be fed by someone who still hoped she was hungry for more than just food. I walked away without comment. There were dishes to wash, tables to check, and a life still unfolding at the corners. Let her eat. Let her think. I wasn't here to be forgiven. I was here to finish what I'd started. The restaurant quieted around 10:15. The last guests lingered over coffee, voices low and comfortable like sweaters worn in just right. I always liked this hour, the way the hum of conversation gave way to clinking mugs, the soft scraping of chairs being gently pushed back, the sigh of a day well spent, a kind of emotional decrescendo. You didn't have to announce the end of the night. The room understood it for you. Ashley had left without ceremony. No hug, no scene, not even a passive-aggressive comment to thread into the air like old times. Just a single plate cleared and a quietly settled bill. I took that as something resembling peace, even if I wasn't sure who it belonged to. In the back, Kai leaned against the walk-in cooler, rubbing his wrists. "Didn't burn anything. That's a first." "Let's not start a streak," I said, handing him a folded towel. He grinned. "I mean it. I haven't felt like this in a kitchen since culinary school." That a compliment or a confession? He laughed. "Both." I watched him walk away, shoulders looser than I'd seen them before. Some nights the proof wasn't in the numbers. It was in posture, in pace, in the absence of tension. I sat at the desk in the back office once the staff left. Ronnie had gone home early. His wife had pulled him into a marriage retreat seminar at the community center. He warned me ahead of time, face wrinkled like a man preparing for surgery. I told him to enjoy it. He left muttering something about icebreakers and flavored tea. The office still smelled faintly of printer ink and lemon cleaner. I opened the drawer where we kept the month's logbook. I flipped through entries marked in different handwriting. Jamie's notes about pastry prep, Marcus's dishwasher inventory, my own scribbles about supplier delays and flour prices creeping up again. I found the most recent printout of our cost versus revenue projections. Ronnie had highlighted 2 columns in yellow, the margins slowly inching in our favor. It wasn't miraculous, but it was honest. We were balancing. And yet I felt something else pressing at me, an itch beneath the skin. Not dissatisfaction, but awareness, a tension that came from momentum. When you've lived long enough watching things stall, you learn to be suspicious when they start to move. That night, I found myself walking home instead of calling a ride. I needed the air. The sidewalks had that late-night sheen, street lamps reflecting off puddles not quite dry, casting double images that danced beneath your feet. I passed storefronts closing up, flickering neon signs giving one last blink before settling into stillness. The city felt younger at night, like it borrowed its quiet from another era. Back in my apartment, I made a cup of tea and stood by the window. The charcoal chef coat was still buttoned, though I had rolled it down to my elbows. My arms ached, but not from strain. It was the kind of ache you feel when your body knows it mattered. Across the way, a neighbor's TV flickered against their curtain, some late-night game show, all applause and spectacle. My place, by contrast, was soft, just the kettle's whistle lingering in the air and the faint rustle of old papers on the counter. I reached for my notebook again, The same one from years ago. The one with the folded corner on page 17. This time, I flipped past it, toward the end. There, in faded ink, was a section I hadn't touched in over a decade. A list of names I once considered for a business that never happened. Nora's Table, it read, circled 3 times, followed by scribbled alternatives, The Hearth, Quiet Season, Morales & Co. At the very bottom of the page, underlined only once, Salted Grace. It stopped me. I traced the words with my finger. I didn't remember writing them. Or maybe I did, but time had blurred the context. Still, something about it held weight. Maybe it was what I'd been aiming for all along. Food not meant to impress, but to anchor, to remind people they were still tethered to something that loved them back. The restaurant didn't have a name on the sign yet. We'd kept the old one temporarily, not out of loyalty but necessity. But perhaps now, it was time. I turned off the lights, brushed my teeth, and laid down with a pen still tucked behind my ear. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen before sunrise. The air still carried the cold from the night before. I flicked on the overheads, their slow hum filling the space. The first thing I did was peel a head of garlic, not because we needed it immediately, but because it helped me think. The rhythm of it. The way each clove came apart, patient and sure. Marcus arrived just after 6. "You're early," I said. He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd beat the noise." "You did." He grabbed an apron from the hook and paused. "That smell? Garlic?" "Always garlic." He smiled. By 8, the rest of the staff began to filter in. I called everyone to the front before the doors opened. "We're rebranding," I said. They exchanged glances. "What's the new name?" Jamie asked. I held up the notepad. Salted Grace. There was a pause, and then a slow nod from Kai. "That's us," he said. "That's the food." Ronnie walked in late, coffee in hand. "Did I miss a meeting?" I turned to him. "No, but you missed a naming ceremony." He raised a brow. "We landed on something?" I pointed to the chalkboard. He read it twice, then set his coffee down and said, "Let's repaint the sign before next week." It was the first time no one argued. Later that afternoon, I stood outside with Kai and Marcus, watching as a local artist sketched the outline for the new signage. Salted Grace, in soft serif, hand-painted, deep blue on cream wood. Ashley passed by on her way to the salon. She slowed when she saw it, her brows knitting. She looked at me from across the street. I met her gaze without a wave. Some names speak loudest when you don't have to explain them. The first full weekend under the new name came faster than I'd expected. No dramatic unveil, no influencers snapping photos beside plates of food they barely touched. Just people, locals, neighbors, folks who wandered in out of curiosity and left with carryout boxes held close to their chests like something sacred. What surprised me most was how the name seemed to settle things. Salted Grace. It grounded the space in something older than trend. Customers said it felt like a place they'd known before, even if they hadn't. Like the smell of cinnamon from a childhood they couldn't quite place. Like a song their grandmother used to hum while folding laundry. Ronnie said it best when he muttered, "It's like the walls let go of whatever was haunting them." He meant it as a joke, but I felt the truth in it. We didn't overhaul the menu right away. I made a few adjustments, simplified the descriptions, tightened the prep timeline, but mostly we focused on service, how it felt to be greeted without pretense, how it sounded when someone said thank you and meant it. Kai worked the grill like he was conducting a quartet, calm, intuitive, precise. Jamie had started experimenting with new desserts, things she'd never had the nerve to suggest before. Her latest? A honey custard pie with a black pepper crust that made one man tear up over his last bite. Marcus took over inventory entirely, said it gave him a sense of control. I trusted him. I trusted all of them, really. They were becoming more than a team. They were claiming the space the way I had, with hands, with sweat, with care. But growth brings new weight, too. Monday morning, the contractor showed up early with a clipboard full of things we didn't yet have the budget to fix. Plumbing under the bar needed rework. The refrigeration units were operating at 85%, which was fine for now, in the same way a limp is fine until the bone gives. I signed off on what I could, deferred the rest. Ronnie and I stood outside near the alley after the man left, both of us nursing paper cups of coffee that tasted like burnt intentions. "We'll need to be careful," he said. "We're skating close on our overhead." "I know," I replied. "Think the new name is enough to carry momentum?" It's not the name, it's the story. He tilted his head. I've seen places like this try to sell themselves with logos and slogans, I explained, but people stay for what they feel, and right now they feel us holding something steady. He nodded, then sipped the last of his coffee. Let's not drop it. That afternoon, I found a folded note in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in familiar script. Inside, one check, made out to Salted Grace LLC, and a short message, Mom, I can't undo everything, but maybe this helps. Ashley. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to patch the bar's plumbing and cover a new fryer basket set Jamie had been too polite to request. I didn't call her, not because I wasn't moved, but because some gestures deserve their own air, their own time to rise. Wednesday was quiet. Midweek lulls often were. I used the afternoon to train 2 new part-time servers. One of them, a sharp-eyed college student named Rafi, asked why we made all our dressings from scratch when bottled ones were cheaper. Because trust has a flavor, I said. He blinked at me. Seriously? I handed him a spoonful of house vinaigrette. He tasted it, thought for a second, then grinned. Okay, I get it. Later, after the evening rush slowed, a woman came in alone. She was older than me by maybe 10 years, with a soft straw hat and a quiet way of observing her surroundings, like someone choosing where to place her last hour of the day. I brought her water myself. You run this place? She asked. I do. I was told I'd find peace here. You were told right. She ordered the lentil stew and ate it slowly, as if it were a hymn. When she left, she touched my arm and whispered, "This is the kind of place people find when they've forgotten what home tastes like." I stood at the door after she walked out, watching her silhouette disappear into the dark. Not everything needs to be shouted to matter. That night, as I locked up, I took a long pause at the entrance. The hand-painted Salted Grace sign caught the last of the streetlight glow. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was managing something. I felt like I was keeping vigil. I remembered years ago when Ashley was young, maybe 10, and she asked why we didn't eat at fancier places like her friend Janelle's family did. I told her, because we don't eat for display, we eat to return to ourselves. Back then, she rolled her eyes. Now, I think she might finally understand. We weren't here to compete with places that plated emptiness beneath edible flowers. We were here to rebuild appetite, real hunger for connection, for memory, for food that stayed with you long after the table was cleared. I closed the door, turned the key, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk. The night was crisp, but kind. A low breeze moved the hanging planter beside the awning. A siren echoed somewhere far off, but didn't reach us. The sky above was clean. I didn't feel tired. I felt full. Not just in the body, but in the part of myself I'd nearly forgotten could still hold so much. There's something unspoken about Friday mornings in a restaurant, the tension and tempo balancing each other like a tightrope. Orders are placed earlier, prep begins before sunrise, and everyone moves like they know the air will thicken by 5 o'clock. We'd learned to move around each other gracefully, the way dancers anticipate each other's steps. No sharp turns, no collisions, just quiet choreography. But that Friday didn't feel normal. It carried a peculiar stillness, like the silence before a sudden downpour. I arrived at Salted Grace at 6:40 a.m., the key stuck slightly in the lock, something I made a mental note to oil. As I stepped inside, I could hear the back fridge humming, the familiar rhythm of pipes clanking behind the dish pit, and the soft shuffle of Marcus already at the sink, sleeves rolled up. "Morning," I called. He raised a damp hand in greeting. "Fryer filters are clean. Jamie's already here too. She's working on the tart shells." I nodded and set my things in the office. There was a note on the desk with the supplier invoice and a single line scribbled at the bottom in Jamie's cursive. "We're almost out of black tea. Thought you'd want to know first." I smiled. Small gestures like that were how you knew the culture of a place was shifting. They weren't just showing up, they were thinking like keepers of the space. I spent the morning rotating stock and fixing the oven pilot light again. Around 9:15, I slipped out front for a coffee break. That's when I noticed the envelope tucked in the doorframe. Cream-colored, no postage, just 2 words, "For Nadine." I opened it slowly, half expecting a vendor issue or a complaint. But inside was something else entirely, a formal invitation, printed on thick cardstock. "You are cordially invited to an influencer-exclusive culinary showcase hosted by Riverstone Magazine, featuring rising food talents from across the city. Location, the Violet Room." I knew the name. a high-gloss reservation-only lounge known for $30 appetizers and flashbulb ambiance. My daughter had once posted 6 photos in one visit and captioned them like she'd discovered fire. But what struck me wasn't the invite, it was the note attached to it. Word around town is, "You're not just keeping up, you're changing the temperature. Come see who you're sitting beside now." No signature, just a wax seal I didn't recognize. I folded the invitation slowly, as if afraid it might wrinkle the clarity I was feeling. Part of me wondered if it was a prank, but the printing was real, the paper expensive. Someone had placed my name on a list I'd never asked to be on. That night, as we prepped for the rush, I tucked the envelope into my apron pocket. Not as a badge, not as proof, just as a reminder that somewhere, people were watching. The following Tuesday, I walked into the Violet Room at exactly 6:55 p.m. I hadn't told anyone from the restaurant. Not Ronnie, not Jamie, not even Marcus. It wasn't secrecy, it was preservation. I wanted to move through this evening without translating it. The Violet Room was everything I remembered it to be. Polished wood tables, walls lined with liquor bottles that looked more like perfume displays, servers dressed sharper than most attorneys I'd ever met. And yet, something in the air felt off-kilter, like an expensive suit that didn't quite fit. I gave my name to the host. His eyebrows twitched. "Salted Grace?" "That's right." He scanned his list and nodded. "Right this way." I was seated at a small round table with 2 other invitees. One was a bearded man who ran a molecular gastronomy pop-up downtown. The other, a 20-something food stylist with 600,000 followers who ordered a cocktail just to photograph the condensation on the glass. We made awkward conversation at first, but as the evening stretched, the stories emerged. Burnt bechamel, a ruined soft launch, a fire code violation over a faulty heat lamp. Kitchens, it turns out, have a universal language, even among those who usually speak in filters and curated captions. At one point, the stylist leaned in and said, "I tried your bread pudding last week, at Salted Grace." I blinked. "You came in?" "Twice. Didn't post. I wanted to see if it still felt the same the second time." "And?" He smiled. "It did. That's rare." I didn't say anything. I just sipped my water and let the compliment rest between us without polishing it. By the end of the evening, each guest was asked to share one lesson from their journey. When it came to me, I cleared my throat. "I've learned that if you stay long enough, past the noise, past the ego, past the hunger to be seen, you start feeding people who didn't know they were starving." The room went still. No applause, no nods, just a beat of silence that felt clean. The next morning, I arrived early again. The sky was just starting to shift from slate to gold. I unlocked the door to Salted Grace with the same key that had once stuck in my hand from doubt. This time, it turned easy. Inside, the air was still cool. I moved through the space slowly, touching tables like I was blessing them, not for luck, but for steadiness. I thought about that round table at the Violet Room, the curated lighting, the careful speech, and then I thought about Jamie burning her first tart and laughing so hard she had to sit on the floor, about Marcus humming to himself while stacking plates, about Ronnie offering to fix a door hinge even though his back had been acting up. I didn't belong at those glossy tables. But the truth was, I hadn't belonged there because I'd built something else. Not shinier, not louder, just more real. And real, I had learned, echoed longer. It was a Wednesday when the letter arrived. Not a bill, not a flyer, not one of those catalogs selling mass-produced nostalgia. This envelope was thick, hand-addressed in blue ink, sealed not with glue, but wax. No return address, just my name, Nadine Morales. It sat in the mailbox beside a coupon for lawn care and a note from the utility company reminding us to upgrade our power usage before summer. I carried all 3 inside, but only opened one. Inside, a short letter and a second folded sheet. "Dear Miss Morales, you don't know me, but I knew your son, years ago. He spoke about your cooking more than he spoke about anything else. I'm opening a small gallery downtown and was wondering if you'd consider catering the opening night. Nothing formal, just something honest, something that tastes like it remembers where it came from. Emery Vale." I read it twice, then unfolded the second sheet. A menu sketch, handwritten. Sweet corn bisque, braised short ribs, black pepper biscuits. Red wine poached pears. No logo, no demands, just dishes in the shape of memory. I stood by the sink, rereading it under the kitchen light while the coffee maker hissed behind me. I hadn't cooked for strangers, not in that way, in years. Salted Grace was built around community, around people who gradually became less strange with every spoonful. But this was different. This was being trusted to speak without words. Ronnie leaned against the prep table when I told him. "Gallery folk?" he asked, raising a brow. "They're not expecting fuss, just food that doesn't lie." He nodded. "That's your language." We spent the rest of the afternoon building a shopping list and working out how the team could handle dinner service without me. Jamie offered to prep dessert if I sent her the specs. Kai looked a little anxious but promised to stick to the script. "I'll double-check every order slip," he said. "You better," I told him. I spent the next 2 days sourcing ingredients, testing a new variation of the corn bisque with chili oil and rosemary cream, and kneading dough until my wrists ached and my shoulders hummed. It felt like remembering how to ride a bicycle in a city that had moved the stoplights. You still found your balance, but slower. Friday came faster than I wanted it to. By 4 p.m., I had loaded everything into borrowed insulated crates and caught a cab across town. The driver asked what I was hauling. When I said, "Something warm," he nodded like he understood more than he let on. The gallery was small, but smartly arranged. High ceilings, soft lighting, abstract canvases leaned against each other like secrets in a shared language. Emery greeted me at the door, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked braids and eyes that had clearly seen both grief and brilliance. "You came," she said. "Thank you." I just nodded and went to work. The kitchen space was little more than a prep nook and a utility sink, but I'd worked with less. I laid everything out methodically, reheated the short ribs gently over flame, spooned the bisque into ceramic mugs that weren't matching but were charming in their imperfection. Guests arrived in waves. Some wore jackets that cost more than our oven, others in sandals and patched coats. But when the food was served, they all softened the same way. Elbows relaxed, voices dropped. A man leaned over his empty cup and said, "This reminds me of my grandmother's porch." Emery smiled from the corner. She wasn't mingling much, just watching, listening. She caught my eye once and mouthed, "You see it?" I did. At the end of the night, after the last dish was returned and the final canvas crated, Emery brought me a glass of seltzer and sat beside me on a folding chair. "My brother knew your son," she said softly. "Years ago, said he used to talk about your lemon bars like they were a religion." I smiled without showing teeth. "I only ever made those when he got A's. He earned a lot of them then." We sat quietly for a while. Then she said, "You've built something rare. Salted Grace, it's more than a restaurant, it's a threshold." I wasn't sure what to say, so I said nothing, just clinked my glass lightly against hers and let the silence carry the weight. When I got home that night, I pulled the lemon bar recipe from the back of my old spiral-bound notebook. The paper was soft at the edges, flour-stained in the corners. I left it on the counter without any intention, just a quiet decision that it should be within reach again. 2 days later, Ashley walked in with Ava. My granddaughter hadn't been to the restaurant since it was renamed. She darted straight to the counter, her eyes wide. "Is it true, you made pudding that makes people cry?" she asked. "Only the ones who need it," I said. Ashley hung back, watching, uncertain. I handed Ava a small bowl of vanilla rice pudding with cinnamon, and the girl grinned like it was treasure. While she ate, Ashley approached slowly. "I heard you catered the veil opening." "I did. They say the short ribs were transcendent. I just braised them low." Ashley hesitated, then sat down. "I've been thinking," she said, "about everything, about what it means to build something that doesn't need applause." I waited. I want Ava to see that. I want her to grow up knowing grace can be strong, that it can have salt and backbone. I looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't see her defenses. I saw a woman unraveling the distance between performance and presence. "She's welcome any time," I said. Ashley nodded. "Can I come too?" "You're already here." Salted Grace had its quiet hours. Not the lull between lunch and dinner. Those were filled with prep work and the clatter of reorganization. I'm talking about the kind of quiet that settles over a place when the tables are wiped, the floor is swept, and everyone's gone home except you. That hush where every creak of the ceiling and hum of the freezer sounds like it's telling you something important. I'd grown to crave that hour. On Thursday, I stayed later than usual. The lemon bar recipe lay open on the counter, same page as always, but now ringed with fresh smudges from flour-dusted fingers. I'd made a batch earlier that day, just to test if I still could. Half the staff ate them before the tray even cooled. Jamie said the crust tasted like childhood. I took the last 2 home with me. That night, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table, a single bar cut in half on a chipped porcelain plate, tea cooling beside it. One half I saved for tomorrow. The other I ate slowly, chewing each bite like it held a story. And maybe it did. Back when Ashley was in 2nd grade, she'd entered a school fundraiser, bake sale. Everyone else brought cookies shaped like cartoon characters or cupcakes with sprinkles in tiny rainbow storms. We brought lemon bars, just lemon bars, on a square tin tray with a dented corner. Ashley had cried in the car, said no one would buy them. But by noon, we had none left. One woman even asked for the recipe. Ashley had walked taller the rest of that day, grinning like she'd invented the citrus fruit herself. And yet, somewhere between then and the rooftop dinner, something shifted. I never did learn exactly when she stopped seeing what I could build. Maybe she needed to forget it for a while, just to realize it still mattered. Maybe most children do. The next morning, Ava came in before the lunch rush. She wore overalls covered in glitter glue and sat herself right on the front counter like she owned the place. No one told her to get down. Jamie handed her a spoon and asked if she wanted to test the new caramel cream. "Too sweet," Ava declared after a single bite. "Needs more salt." Ronnie clapped. "Promotion incoming." I stood at the pass, arms crossed, pretending not to smile too wide. Ashley arrived an hour later. She carried a small box wrapped in brown paper and string. "I brought something," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "For you, or the restaurant, or both." I took it to the back and opened it on the prep table. Inside, 6 mismatched vintage serving spoons, real silver, all engraved with tiny initials on the underside. Some were worn smooth with age, others still had the curve of use in their handles. "They were Grandma Irma's," Ashley said from the doorway. "I found them while clearing out an old chest at the house. I thought maybe you'd want them here." I turned one over in my palm. The weight of it surprised me. Not heavy, but deliberate. "We used to use these at Thanksgiving," I said quietly. Ashley nodded. "You always said they made the cranberry sauce taste more honest." We didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. I placed the spoons in the drawer beside our current flatware, not replacing anything, just adding, some things don't overwrite, they enrich. By Saturday evening, Salted Grace was full, not just with diners, but with something harder to name, a steadiness, a rhythm that didn't feel earned by marketing or luck, but by presence. Ava had painted a sign that now hung near the door. It read, "Food that remembers you." Misspelled twice, painted in pink and green blobs, but none of us had the heart to fix it. One woman came in from out of town. She ordered the lentil stew and asked if she could meet the owner. When I came out, she just looked at me and said, "I drove 6 hours because my sister wouldn't stop talking about this place. She's in remission now. She said this stew got her through chemo." I sat with her while she ate. She didn't need company, really, but she appreciated it. That night, after everyone left and the last chair was flipped, I wiped the table slowly, one by one. My hands moved out of muscle memory, but my mind lingered. Not on invoices or stock counts or tomorrow's specials, but on lineage. On spoons and lemon bars and girls who carry glitter in their pockets like they were born to scatter joy. On food that remembers and people learning how to. I locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and stood at the threshold of the restaurant, holding the key like it was something more than metal. Outside, the streets glowed with the soft hush of evening. City sounds thinned into distance. And in the window's reflection, I saw not just myself, but all the women I came from. My grandmother, who made soup during the war. My mother, who fried eggs in silence after arguments. Myself, who raised a daughter without applause. We weren't perfect, but we fed people. And that has always been holy. There's a kind of quiet that feels earned. Not the silence of absence, but the kind that follows something whole. We had that kind of quiet at Salted Grace on Sunday evenings. No live music, no theme nights, just a soft hum of slow forks, murmured thanks, and second cups of tea. I never scheduled myself on Sundays, not technically. Ronnie always told me to take the day. "You're not 25, he'd remind me, as if I ever needed the math. But most Sundays, I found myself here anyway. Sometimes I'd slip in through the back, after the staff had set everything up, and linger in the kitchen, checking the broth or restocking the lemon slices for the water pitchers. I didn't need to be seen. I just liked knowing the place moved smoothly without me, and that I could still feel its rhythm from the edges. But that Sunday was different. Because that Sunday, I saw her again. Not Ashley, not Ava. Her. Maria Delgado. It had been nearly 3 decades since I'd last seen her in person. She was one of those friends that life wedges into your bones in youth but pulls away before adulthood finishes hardening them. We met working a service line in a hotel downtown, long before either of us had children or knew what a mortgage really meant. She used to roll tamales by memory and hum lullabies under her breath while doing it. We lost touch the way people do when bills get bigger and time gets thinner. But there she was, hair fully white now, her frame even smaller than I remembered. She walked in alone, shoulders drawn back like someone determined not to be forgotten. I caught her profile first and froze. It was the kind of recognition that lives beneath language. The body remembers who loved it well. I waited a moment, then walked out from the kitchen with a cloth still in hand. She looked up slowly, and her eyes did that thing eyes do when they realize the past has caught up, but kindly. "Nadine," she whispered, not fully believing it. I smiled. "You didn't think I'd forget your face." She stood before I could cross the space and embraced me, arms tighter than her frame suggested they could manage. I held on just as fiercely. "You run this place?" she asked, pulling back to look at me. I nodded. "Built it from scrap and willpower." "And your lemon bars," she added with a sly grin. "I knew you'd remember." We sat at a corner table, tucked near the window where the light spilled gold across her cheekbones. She ordered the lentil stew. I brought it myself. "You always said you wanted a place of your own," she said between bites. "You said it like a prayer back then. Like if you said it enough times while scrubbing trays, the walls would move for you." I exhaled. They finally did. She looked around the room. "You made space for people here. You didn't just open doors. You left them open." That line stopped me. Because it was true. Every decision I'd made about Salted Grace, every dish, every layout choice, every hire had been about inclusion, not display. About making people feel not just welcomed, but wanted. Maria stayed for nearly 2 hours. We talked about everything: her daughter's work in Vancouver, the boy she lost too young, the garden she still stubbornly maintained, despite the raccoons. Her voice carried the softness of grief and the insistence of survival. I knew both tones well. When she left, she pressed something into my hand. A tiny card, no bigger than a matchbook, with a quote handwritten across it. "The ones who remember us without being reminded, those are the ones we owe everything to." It wasn't signed, it didn't have to be. That night, after closing, I found myself back at the same table we'd shared. The stew bowl had been cleared, the chairs were empty again, but I could still feel her laughter in the wood. Ronnie came over with 2 cups of peppermint tea and sat without asking. "Old friend?" he asked. "The kind you don't lose even when you do." He nodded, sipping slowly. She seemed to get it. "Get what?" "What this place really is." I looked at him and smiled. "Most people think we're serving food," I said, "but we're not. We're serving history, connection, a second chance to feel like you matter before you leave a room." Ronnie didn't say anything for a moment. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out a photo. A boy, maybe 12, beaming on a bicycle. "My nephew," he said. "He thinks I just work the front of a restaurant. Someday I want to tell him what it really means." I placed the card Maria gave me on the table between us. "Start here," I said. He read the quote, then leaned back in his chair, quiet again. We didn't speak for the rest of the tea. We didn't need to. Outside, the moonlight caught the word grace on our sign just right, as if even the sky had something it wanted to remember. The first rain of the season came quietly, slipping between dawn and daylight like a whispered apology. The sidewalks glistened, the kind of wet that made reflections stretch long and distorted beneath the passing headlights. I unlocked the front door of Salted Grace, as I always did, before the city was fully awake, before the delivery truck backed into the alley, before the ovens were warm enough to carry scent. I stood at the threshold for a moment, letting the stillness settle over me like an old apron. Then I stepped inside. The place smelled of rosemary and pine cleaner, cinnamon from the batch of rolls Jamie had made the night before. I didn't flip the lights right away. The dimness held something sacred. I liked the way the morning teased the edges of our walls with its hesitant gray. But something about the quiet felt different. I walked slowly to the back office and found a note folded on the desk. No envelope, just a square of yellow paper with my name written across the top in a handwriting I didn't recognize at first. Inside, the message was short. You probably don't remember me, but I haven't forgotten you. I came in last month. I didn't say who I was. I wasn't ready. I'm not sure I am now, but I wanted to leave this behind in case I lose my nerve again. There was no signature, just an address, and below it, a line that nearly took my breath from me. You made me feel seen when I didn't yet exist to anyone else. I sat down. Tried to place the face. I thought of the gallery, the visitors, the quiet ones who dined alone and left no names, of the woman with the red scarf, the man who took 2 napkins, the teenager who asked if he could sit by the window and didn't order until the second hour. It could have been any of them. Or maybe all of them. Because this was what Salted Grace had become. Not just a restaurant, a sanctuary, for the forgotten, the unseen, the almost healed. I folded the paper and tucked it gently into the notebook where I kept supplier contacts and pastry ratios. No safer place, I thought. That book had built a future. It could hold a secret. Around mid-morning, the weather shifted. The clouds grew denser. The sky darkened, as if someone had pressed a thumb against the dimmer switch. Most of the regulars still came. A few deliveries were delayed. One table canceled. Ronnie made a joke about rain scaring off modern appetites. But in truth, I liked days like this, when the warm air inside felt earned, when guests lingered longer, letting the steam from their tea fog the windows. Jamie brought me a plate with a single lemon bar on it, set it beside the register, and said, "Ava says this one has her name on it." I grinned. "Then I'll eat it in her honor." Later, after the rush, I wandered back to the kitchen where Kai was chopping onions, humming something old and slow. "You good for tonight?" I asked. He nodded. "I've got it." "You sure?" He wiped his hands. "This kitchen holds me better than therapy ever did." I patted his shoulder and left him to it. That evening, just as the last of the dinner crowd settled in, the bell above the door rang softly. A woman stepped inside, holding an umbrella in one hand and a dripping coat over her arm. She wore a dark blue cardigan, her hair in a low braid. She looked around slowly, as though searching for something she wasn't entirely certain existed. I recognized her only when she stepped closer to the counter. It was the woman who'd come in during our first week after the name change. She hadn't stayed long, hadn't even ordered, just walked the room like someone brushing up against memory. She caught my eye now and said, "Do you still serve the corn bisque?" "We do," I replied gently. She hesitated. "And lemon bars?" "Of course." She nodded. "Then I'd like to stay a while, if that's all right. Take any table." She sat near the far window, her coat draped over the back of the chair, umbrella leaning like a tired companion. I brought her the bisque myself. She didn't speak at first, just held the bowl in both hands, eyes closed, as she breathed in the scent. "I didn't write the note," she said finally, "but I understand why someone did." I sat across from her, without asking. Sometimes silence needed company more than conversation. "My mother used to make soup like this," she continued, "but only when she wasn't crying." I nodded. "I used to bake when I couldn't sleep. I figured if I couldn't rest, I might as well rise." She laughed quietly. "That sounds like you." We sat there, the bisque slowly disappearing between us, the sound of forks and low voices murmuring in the background. Outside, the rain had turned steady. When she finished, she placed the spoon down gently and looked at me with a steadiness that felt earned. "Thank you," she said, "not for the food, for the door, for leaving it open." That line echoed something Maria had said days before. I tucked it in the same corner of myself, the part that kept all the unclaimed thank yous. She stood, left cash folded beneath the bowl, and walked out without asking for a box, or a receipt, or even her umbrella. I found it 10 minutes later, still leaning by the door. I left it there. Some things belong near exits, like grace, like memory, like the comfort that someone might come back for what they didn't realize they needed. 2 days after the woman left her umbrella behind, I found a sealed envelope waiting at the front counter. There was no name, just the word return, handwritten in bold script across the flap. I'd know that handwriting anywhere. It was Ashley's. Inside was a single index card, yellowed at the edges, familiar lines faded but still legible. It was the recipe for my mother's arroz con leche, written in my own hand nearly 40 years ago. I had given Ashley a copy the summer before her first apartment lease, tucked into a box of dollar store utensils and dented cookware. I didn't think she'd kept any of it. But here it was, returned without fanfare, wrapped in silence. On the back, she'd written, "I never made it right. It always tasted like something was missing. Now I know it was you." There was no request, no apology, just a confession folded into parchment, a recognition of the weight I carried and the flavor it gave. I ran my thumb across the ink. I could still smell the faint scent of cinnamon from the card, or maybe I imagined it. The brain makes up for what the hands no longer hold. I didn't respond. Not yet. Some answers live in action more than words. That evening, I pulled out the last bag of short-grain rice from the pantry, along with the tin of condensed milk I kept for rare occasions. I let the milk simmer low and slow, the way my mother taught me, no rushing, no stirring more than necessary, just patience and a wooden spoon worn smooth with history. Ava came in while I was zesting the lemon. She pulled a chair up to the prep table and rested her chin on her fists. "Is this a secret recipe?" she asked. "It used to be." "Why not anymore?" "Because some recipes need to be returned before they can be shared again." She blinked. "Like boomerangs?" I smiled. "Exactly like boomerangs." She watched quietly as I stirred the rice. Her presence reminded me how many things I'd stopped explaining aloud, how often I'd assumed no one was listening. But Ava always was. When the pudding finished, I spooned 2 small portions into ceramic bowls and slid one toward her. She took a bite, chewed slowly, then looked at me with wide, serious eyes. "This tastes like a hug," she said. And somehow, that was all I needed to hear. Later that night, after the tables had been cleared and the staff had clocked out, I stood alone by the chalkboard wall near the front entrance, the one we left blank for guests to write on with colored chalk. Usually, it held names, inside jokes, drawings of soup bowls or crooked hearts. Tonight, it had just one sentence written in soft green script. She reminded me what warmth was supposed to feel like. I didn't know who wrote it. Didn't need to. The message was enough. I stared at it for a long while, before turning the lights down low and locking the door. The next morning, the fog clung to the sidewalk like it had been poured there. Everything outside looked softened, edges blurred, shadows gentler. The world doesn't rush when it's wrapped in mist. Neither did I. As I stirred the day's first pot of bisque, Marcus came in early and handed me a small package. It was at the door, he said. No label, just said for Grace. Inside the brown wrapping was a copy of La Cocina de Mamá, a cookbook I hadn't seen in years. My mother's favorite. She used to read it like scripture, annotating margins with flowery fingerprints and substitutions she insisted improved the original. Inside the front cover was a note. For the woman who turned a restaurant into a prayer. No signature. Again. But I was beginning to understand that some acknowledgments don't need names, they only need timing. Later that day, I finally called Ashley. Not to ask about the recipe card, not even to thank her. I called to ask if she'd like to come by next Sunday. Just the two of us, no crowd, no kitchen bustle, just time. She hesitated before answering. "What for?" "To learn how to make a arroz con leche," I said. "Properly this time." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "I'd like that." I knew she would. Some meals aren't about taste, they're about timing, and redemption served warm. That evening, just before closing, I set the 2 remaining bowls of pudding in the fridge, one for me, one for Ashley. I wrote her name on a piece of masking tape and stuck it to the lid. My handwriting has changed over the years, less tidy now, more practical, but she'd recognize it. I stood in the kitchen for a while longer than necessary. Not from fatigue, from fullness. It's a strange thing, to feel grief and peace share the same room. To let go of what was never said while holding what was finally returned. The recipe, the memory, the daughter. The flavor of forgiveness simmering slowly back to life. Sunday came quietly, without ceremony. The sky was the color of porcelain just before it breaks into blue, and the sidewalk still shimmered from the storm the night before. I opened Salted Grace an hour earlier than usual, not for customers, but for something older and more personal. Ashley arrived right on time. She wore jeans and a pale sweater, no makeup, no performance. She walked in with both hands tucked into her jacket pockets, as if unsure whether this counted as an invitation or an olive branch. But I'd made sure the lights were dimmed low, the music soft, and the kitchen warm enough to speak first. I greeted her with a nod, handed her an apron, and said, "You'll want to roll the sleeves." She smiled faintly and followed me back. We didn't begin with talk, we began with rice. I showed her how to rinse it gently until the water ran clear. She watched, then repeated the motion, more carefully than I'd expected. Her hands were steadier than I remembered, less adorned, more sure. When the milk hit the bottom of the pot, she leaned in and asked, "Why condensed milk?" "Because life's too short for bland sweetness," I said. "It needs depth, something aged, like forgiveness." She didn't respond, but I saw the understanding settle into her eyes. I handed her the wooden spoon. "Your turn," I said. She stirred. Not quickly, not carelessly, just slow, circular movements, the way I'd once done beside my own mother. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and citrus zest, and I felt time folding in on itself, not collapsing, but curling like steam into memory. "I used to think this was just food," Ashley said. "But now, standing here, it feels like a story." "It is." She stirred a moment longer, then asked, "Do you remember when I said you were broke?" "I remember." She looked down. "I don't even know why I said it. I think I was scared of failing, of being ordinary. You built something out of almost nothing, and I couldn't understand that, so I mocked it. I didn't reach for her. I didn't interrupt. I've spent so long trying to look like I had it together," she continued. "But you were together. Not flashy, not loud, just solid, and I didn't have a category for that." The arroz con leche bubbled gently at the edges. I adjusted the heat. "You're not the only one who's tried to translate strength by volume," I said, "but that kind of strength shatters. What stays is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It keeps feeding people even when no one says thank you." She wiped her cheek with her sleeve. "You still feed people like that. I'm feeding you now." We smiled. She ladled the pudding into small bowls while I crushed the cinnamon stick. I watched her sprinkle the sugar across the top like it was an offering. When we sat down together at the back table, it wasn't as mother and daughter, not yet, not fully, but as women trying again, one spoonful at a time. She took a bite and closed her eyes. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what it was supposed to taste like." I didn't reply. I just kept eating. Later, after the bowls were cleared and the sink had gone quiet, Ashley stood at the chalkboard near the door. She stared at it for a while, then picked up the white chalk and began to write. Her handwriting hadn't changed much, still a little slanted, still a bit too large, but the message stopped me cold. She wasn't broke, she was the wealth I couldn't count. I turned away before she could see what that did to me. Not because I didn't want her to know, but because some acknowledgments take root best in the silence after they're spoken. When she left, she hugged me with both arms, no pat on the back, no half measures, just a full, settled kind of hug that said, "I see you now." She didn't say goodbye, just, "See you next Sunday? You know where to find me." That evening, I stayed past close again. I wiped the counter twice, adjusted the spoons in their drawer, folded 2 clean aprons, and set them beside the stove, one for me, one for her. I pulled out my notebook and turned to the final page. Then I wrote one more recipe. Not measured in cups and spoons, but in lessons. Start with silence. Let the room tell you what it needs. Add warmth, measured not by heat, but by presence. Fold in memory, gently, don't overwork it. Serve with hands open. Let what leaves you feed others. I left the page untitled. Some recipes name themselves only after they've been made enough times. Just before locking up, I looked once more at the chalkboard. Her message still glowed there, smudged slightly by moisture in the air. I left it. Let the night hold it a little longer. Grace doesn't fade when the lights go out. It settles deeper into the floorboards. Into spoons. Into daughters. Into every bowl that's ever fed someone back into themselves.